I'd like to welcome Mr. Bill Buchanan.
Thank you, Richard. That was fun and kind of you. I am glad to be here, and I am going to be retired in 3 weeks. I've had 24 wonderful years here and 47 years at public service, and proud to be one of 21 million bureaucrats, and I'm happy to do that. I started my career in southwestern Pennsylvania, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the things I've learned along the way. It's in coal country. It's next to West Virginia on the west and on the south. And in that county, you assessed coal veins. And the determinant of how the assessed value of coal veins were two major determinants. One was how deep they were, and the second one, how close they were to the river. Despite coal being hauled by truck, despite it being hauled by train, in the 60s and still today, the determinant is how close they are to the Monongahela River. I'm not so sure why. I was a planner in that community, and I was reminded that I didn't particularly care for the role of a planner. The story goes that a woman was about to be married for the 4th time, and she told her prospective husband, "You need to know that I'm a virgin." And he said, "How's that possible?" He said, "Well, the first husband and I went to Italy, and we were married and walking down the cathedral steps. And they were marble, and the sun was shining, and it was in his eyes and my eyes, and he slipped and fell and hit his head and went into coma and died." He said, "My second husband was very wealthy. He loved to ski. We were married in Colorado, changed our clothes in the church, went on the ski slope, going to have the reception that night. He ran into a tree and was killed. And my third husband was a planner. He told me how great and wonderful things were going to be, but nothing ever happened." and so that's why I got out of the planning business. I took a job in the Catskill Mountains in the 70s, and I had an opportunity. It was the Borscht Belt. And so I got to hear Henny Youngman, and I got to hear Shecky Green. And in 1973, I walked into the hotel and watched Joe Norton trained for his first fight with Muhammad Ali. No security, no guards. You could watch him spar, you could hear conversations, and that was a joy. I then went to be the first manager in Franklin, Pennsylvania. It's on the confluence of the French Creek and the Allegheny River. In 1754, Lieutenant Colonel George Washington showed up at Fort Michaud to try to negotiate with the French, and he was unsuccessful because 2 months later the French and Indian War started. I learned about the value of the dollar in that community. In that community, there was a manufacturer by the name of Joy Manufacturing that made sophisticated deep mining equipment. And that local economy rocked and rolled every time the value of the dollar was devalued, because the South Africans and the South Americans would place orders for these very sophisticated equipment. And so it was a good lesson in economy. After that job, I was on the enviable position of having 2 offers for the city manager job. And one was East Windsor, New Jersey, which is next to Princeton, suburb of Princeton. And this was 1985. Some of you remember that Richard Nixon started what was called revenue sharing, and that was money given to local governments without strings. And East Windsor used it for capital projects. And they were very worried that they were not going to be able to complete a bridle path in the park. That was one job offer. The other one was northwest, in the south central part of Michigan. They were proud that the unemployment rate went down to 17.5%. Down to 17.5%. They had no insurance. They let the insurance lapse. The revenue sharing that they were losing was used to fund operations, and they were losing 18% of their revenue in the next year. And that was the challenging job, and I had a wonderful time there. And in 1991 came here and just have had a great time in this community and love it dearly. But let me get to the topic of the speech, and thanks for that reminiscence. Can government run like a business? And I would suggest to you that we need to use business metrics, need to use business's process, and we need to steal the good practices that they do and implement those for our work. But it cannot be governed. It cannot be governed like a business. Let me start with 3 premises. The first premise is, what's your obligation to Target? What's your obligation to Quick Trip or Dillon's? I would suggest to you, you have no obligation. What's your obligations to the community in which you live? I would suggest you have an obligation to obey the laws. I would suggest your obligation to pay taxes. Some of us are obligated to vote or participate in the public process. So that the get-go, the relationship between customers and business, between citizens and communities, citizens and their local government is different. There's a different relationship. I would also suggest to you the second premise is that local government's realm of business is in the conflict, managing the conflict of values. Not so in business. We manage the conflict of values. We both want to be efficient and effective, and that's a great value for both government and business. But you put efficiency and effectiveness juxtaposition to the notion of we're going to be representative of all the people. We're going to go out of our way to engage you in conversations about transit systems. We're going to go out of our way to talk about how the best solution to water. Go out of our way to say, where do you want the arena? How are we going to pay for it? How big is it? What about the parking? We're going to talk about trash and how that needs to be done. We have public hearings all the time. That is not a model for efficient decision-making process. Not a model at all. Then you throw in this notion of the democratic principle of property rights and personal rights that automatically conflicts with citizens, and our local government officials deal with that routinely. I want to sit in my backyard, and I want to listen to soft music and maybe smoke a cigar. And you, on the other hand, want to rebuild 1957 Chevys. And to do so, you need to rev up the engine, you need to pound the fenders, you need to make a lot of noise. Board of County Commissioners, City Councils, Cheney Council, routinely intervene in that decision-making process, trying to resolve those conflicts. When Dr. Tiller was in business, I had a right to go protest. My daughter had a right to cross that picket line. Our police officers, our sheriff's officers, our decision-makers have to balance the rights of those citizens to make sure they're protected. This is a conflict of values that doesn't occur in business. And the third notion of democracy, which really muddies up the efficiency factor, is this notion of social equity. Why? We provide services that are socially equitable. Wouldn't it be a lot more efficient and wouldn't it be a lot more effective if the city of Wichita would put fire stations only in the rich neighborhoods? If a house in northeast Wichita burns down, it's only $40,000 or $60,000. We don't do that. That never crosses our mind. We deliver services that are equitable to no matter what you look like, no matter what your income is, no matter where you live, you get services based on social equity principles. Doesn't happen in business. The third notion, the third principle that I want to talk about is the diffusion of power. In business, it's pretty much an executive decision-making process. In local government, it is the legislative process. Now, just for the fun of it, let's assume that all organizations have 100 points of power. How many points of power do you think Charles Koch has? How many points of power do you think Charlie Chandler has? How many points of power do you think that Ernst has at Textron? How many does Carl Peter John or Richard Ranzo have? There's 5 commissioners. Do they each have 20%? I would guess not. You have elected sheriff, you have elected district attorney, you have elected clerk, treasurer, and register of deeds. You have the builders association, you have neighborhood associations. It's a diffused power decision-making process. It takes different skills. It takes skills honed at a different level. It takes skills that are inclusive, It takes skills that bring people to the table for conversations. It takes skills about negotiations that are different than in the business world. Now, we know that one of the skills that are needed in this process is the power of language. How is language used? We need to stop the bureaucratic mumbo jumbo. We need to tell our stories, and we need to tell citizens stories about how we deliver services so they understand it in a way that makes sense. Abraham Lincoln was a great storyteller, and I'm going to tell you a story that my wife said I shouldn't do, and I'm going to tell you a story that's has no relevance to the speech at all. But Lincoln told the story, and I love it, and I heard it from Doris Kearns Goodwin, and it's in her book and in the movie. And it's about Ethan Allen being in England, and Ethan Allen was teased because he spoke funny and had funny clothes, and it wasn't a very pleasant experience. And one night he was at a dinner, and the guests were kind of amused by him and put a picture of George Washington in the outhouse. And at some point in the evening, Ethan Allen had to use the outhouse. And so he came back, and not a word was said. And they were very curious. Mr. Allen, didn't you see anything unusual in the outhouse? No, I didn't, he said. Well, didn't you see a picture of George Washington? He said, yes, but that's most appropriate. I can't think of anything that would scare the shit out of Englishmen more than George Washington's picture. That's one story. But the kinds of stories I'm talking about are the kinds of stories that we tell about service delivery. And this happened a couple years in a budget session, and it stuck with me because it speaks to the kind of service that Sedgwick County gives, and it's a true story. Commissioners were asking, why are we budgeting $20,000 for emergency fund in ComCare and our mental health stuff for only 33 citizens? What's this used for? Well, the story is, and it's an accurate one, is police department found a car in the middle of the street and a young man in it, and he said, my car's broken. And they discovered really rapidly that he was confused. The car was out of gas, and they called our emergency folks. And our emergency mental health folks come, crisis intervention people, and discovered that the man had been away from his home for 3 weeks. His parents were sick. They didn't know where he was. We called the parents, let them know he's here, we'll take care of him. We put him up in a hotel. Sedgwick County used our emergency money to put him up in a hotel. Didn't put him to jail, in a hotel. Cheaper. He took his dog with him. We know that mentally ill patients with pets, it's important to keep them connected. And so we have hotels lined up that'll take them. Got him on his meds, bought him some underwear, gave him food, got him some pizza, visited him next day, got him stabilized, and the third day we filled his car up with gas and put $10 in his pocket to buy lunch on the way home to Texas, and off he went. And a couple days after that, our caseworkers got a bouquet of cookies from the parents with a check reimbursing us for all those funds. That's the kind of service that Sedgwick County does routinely. But let me tell you about some of the business metrics that we're using. We have, because of our computer system and because of our work over the last several years, we have about 500 key performance indicators. Now, I don't look at all of them. Middle managers look at some, senior managers look at some, I look at some, and we begin to use data-driven information to make decisions. We noticed a couple years ago that ambulances were at the hospital 25, 35, 45, 50 minutes. In Kansas, when you take a patient to the hospital, you can't just leave them there. The hospital has to sign off. And they have to go through a routine to do that. So we sat down with the hospital and said, how do we do that faster? Is there a way to speed up the process? Could we knock off 10 minutes? And we figured out a way to do that. It's more than 10 minutes now. But 10 minutes, 75 ambulance trips a day. It's now 106, but at that time it was 75. That's 750 minutes. That's 12 and a half hours of ambulances on the street, serving you, that we didn't have to hire someone, that was a cost-saving method that made sense. Ambulance numbers are going up. We can't keep up with the demand. We can't afford to keep up with the demand, so we continue looking at ways to do that. In another data-driven way, we started looking at different calls. We have a call that's called man down. This is a person who's lying in the street, laying on a bench at the library, you see somebody laying. We do several thousand, couple thousand of those calls a year. We send police, fire, and ambulance with sirens and lights going to all those calls. Now, you and I have been frustrated about why the ambulance and fire truck shows up all the time. It doesn't make sense. So we started examining the data. Of those 2,000 or some calls, 1% are severe. So we have asked to take a different look at it. We're now going to dispatch the police. Now, the police can go and they can determine whether the guy's drunk or the woman is sick or they're just sleeping. And if it's determined that they need ambulance, then the police can call. And so we're not going to send fire and ambulance on every one of those calls. Car accidents. 15% of all car accidents require transport. Only 15%. So we're going to take a look at how we treat car accidents differently. We'll send the fire department with lights and siren, but we're not going to send an ambulance, lights and siren. The fire department has the equipment and training to stabilize the patient till we get there. And if they get there and say, this guy's really in trouble, then we'll turn on the lights and siren. Same way with, we're called to nursing homes a lot to transport people in nursing homes to hospitals. And again, lights and we take fire department and ambulance to do that. Well, the ambulance is a transportation mode. We don't need the fire department there. And so we've asked the fire departments, you don't have to come on these, and we'll call you. The only time we need you if the patient is over 400 pounds, because 2 of our ambulance people can't lift that, and we need the bodies to do that. And so they're going to save 11% of the runs by some of these decisions we're making by data. So that's just one example of how we're using it. Another example was, and my final example in Sedgwick County is that we have billing processes that we bill Medicaid and insurance companies. Health department does it, EMS, emergency ambulance does it, EMS, health department does it. And 2 or 3 years ago, we were paying 5.7% cost to bill. We've combined those departments into one billing unit. We've trained them up, and now our cost for billing is 2.27%, $330,000 savings a year by using business metrics. So I've had a great run. I've had a great time. We want to assure you that Sedgwick County is well run. I want to assure you that we deliver quality public service to you every day and to your neighbors every day, and you're welcome. You may ask questions, and I may choose not to answer them.
If you've got a question, hand up, and I'll come your way with my microphone.
Within the same context of some of the things you've done, is there a possibility, or has it been used to have some motivation incentive for Sedgwick County employees to be rewarded for major savings if they can come up with ideas? I've asked that question previously of a manager, and at that point they said that was their job anyway. But anybody in the real world knows that it would be a motivating factor.
We have, unlike most governments, we have over the last 10 years have a very sophisticated pay-for-performance system. So those people who are shining stars in the organization get paid when we have a pay pool, get paid more than the not-so-shining stars. And the not-so-shining stars, if you're that way for two pay period or two review periods, and that could be in a period of 4 or 5 months, you no longer work with us. So that's our reward system. We do not have a system where you have an idea that you're going to save $1 million and we're going to give you $10,000. We don't have that.
Any other questions? You make it all easy.
You made a comment that resonated with me about the models and inefficiency, trying to make decisions in public meetings. Been involved in some of those. It's hard to get people to come. Do you think there's a possibility we could ever just say, let's throw that model out and start from scratch? And have you ever had ideas of how you would do that?
It is a struggle to, one of the frustrating things about being an elected official, I'm sure, and being in my position, is the lack of participation by citizens. And somehow we have to have conversations about them taking responsibility. The water situation in the city of Wichita is not the government's problem, it's a citizen's problem. And what are we going to do about that? It's the same with other issues. And so we try to use social media, we try to use other things to engage citizens, but somehow there's the level of dissatisfaction is not sufficient to have people show up.
What advice would you give to the four county commissioners who are sitting here listening to you of what to look for your replacement, and what advice would you give to that replacement in that community?
I have made it very clear to the county commissioners, and I've made it very clear to the staff, and I've made it very clear to the person that we've hired to help us find someone, that I'm out of this process. I don't think it is in my best interest. I don't think it's in the county's best interest for me to be in it. And so I have worked real hard to make sure I'm at an arm's length, more than an arm's length distance from that process. There will be good candidates, and there'll be the candidates will be vetted, and people need to interview them and see how they fit, and it'll be fine.
There are some things that the county has decided to do pretty much like a business. I'm thinking of the outsourcing of the operation and management of the Interest Bank Arena. But the building that replaced, the Kansas Coliseum and the pavilions, I believe that county employees used to run both of those organizations. So could you explain why did the county decide to outsource to a business the operation of the Interest Bank Arena and not other things that could be in similar type of situation?
Well, we do outsource our janitorial service, and we do outsource a lot of the functions that we used to do in the repair of vehicles and body shop work that we used to do, and we outsource the carpentry work and the painting, and so there's a number of things that we continue to look at to see what the private sector can do better than the public sector. When the voters decided that we were going to build the arena, we went through a process to decide who should run the arena. And it was clear to me that there was lots of different companies in the country and in the world to do that. We gave our employees an opportunity, provided them a fund to help them hire consultants so that they could bid on the process themselves. And the three people that we interviewed, it was clear that SMG had the best product, and we chose them rather than our own employees.
At one time, we had truly a county commission where we had 3 county commissioners. I think the city of Wichita had city commissioners, and then they were transcended. In fact, we had Ed Flinges come in and talk about the advent of city management. Can you give us a little bit of contrast, some historical perspective, and why we have city and county managers today doing the professional work, and then also, if you don't mind, talk about the functions of who sets policy and who implements.
Did Ed Flingy lecture for 90 minutes or 40 minutes? I'd expect so. And he may be the better one to answer the question. The council manager form of government started in 1909 in Staunton, Virginia. And it came out of the progressive movement, Alan White, and the movement to clean up politics. And the idea was that you would have a professional person run the government, and your elected officials would create the policy and set direction and point them in the right direction. Since that time, the council manager form of government has spread to cities, and in the last 20 years, a number of counties. And it's the elected officials' job to set policy. Obviously, the staff may have ideas about what that policy might be, gives them advice. But if we're doing our job correctly, it is make sure the elected officials have enough information to make an informed decision. And at the end of the day, when we say they have enough information to make a informed decision, we've done our job.
Back here, next question.
Sir, what service entities in the city and the county, in your view, could be consolidated?
We've struggled with the code enforcement, and we're going to continue to struggle with that until we get them co-located. Animal control could be one. We have different functions. The county animal control deals with oftentimes large animals out in the rural part of the county. The truck that the cattle escaped the other day is one of the issues. But animal control is animal control, and that could be done. In the 80s, the IT was combined, and that didn't work, and it's taken apart. But again, you could do that. We could do purchasing. We tried to set up a purchasing deal with the city and the county and the school district. That's another opportunity that has escaped us. So I think there's a number of functional consolidations that could occur. And the notion, because of revenue, the diminishment of revenues for local governments, is we have to start thinking that way. That we have to think about ways in which we can share services. And that means some of us are going to lose control, some control, but we got to get over that and get over ourselves and figure out that this is the right way to do business.
Next question right here.
No,
Yeah.
I'm not talking to you.
24 years, a lot of things have come and gone. What would you point to with pride in terms of shaping the direction of the county? And what would you point to that you wish you could redo?
I know you don't have to answer the question.
I'm going to struggle with what I'd redo, but I'll think of something. I think a couple things that take specific pride in is that, as you well know, when I got here, it was a pretty good old boy system. Relatives were hired, friends were hired without regard to qualifications. It was a good old political boy system, and we have, because of the Board of County Commissioners at the time wanted to see a change, and because the future Board of County Commissioners have made sure that we are a professional, well-run organization. And so having changed the culture, having helped change the culture, was an important part of what's occurred. The other thing that is particularly pride is that the seriousness by which we take our service delivery to the less fortunate of this community. People who have been clobbered by birth, people who have been clobbered because of mental illness or an accident or because of aging, that we spend specific time and energy making sure service delivery to those are pretty high quality. A decade or more ago, Starkey, it's a wonderful organization, had some board members and a director who didn't quite understand that. And we had complaints because of these people, citizens with Down syndrome or some other issues in halfway houses. The toilet wouldn't flush for 2 days. The shower wouldn't work. And we had inspectors, and we began engaging in conversations that fixed that changed that administration, that now Starkey is an absolute star in providing those services. Government interfered in that deal that made sense. And so that's one of the things, Ed, that we make sure we are paying attention to those who are less fortunate than us. The Homeless Task Force, the Child Advocacy Center, those kinds of issues, I think, are critical to what we do. Things that I could have done over, there's a long list that I'm not going to talk about.
Next question is back here.
Anyone that's been in your position this long and done as many things as you have you considered authoring something that would provide, call it some rules of thumb that you've learned and that could be passed on to other people that want to pursue
Yeah.
jobs like yours?
Don't screw up. That's it.
Any other questions?
You're getting your exercise today.
No, I'm doing a light workout.
In city government, the clerk and some of the officials are actually selected by the city council, or maybe the manager, and we do elections of the register of deeds, the clerks. What's your opinion on the efficiencies, or the people who are elected to be the clerk, more accountable to people, or you have a view on that?
In 1991, the state legislature had hearings here in Wichita and then in Topeka about consolidation of governments. And in 1991, I testified and said then, and I still hold the opinion, that the clerk, treasurer, and register of deeds should not be elected, that they are clerical positions. And so if they were going to have a good debate about the treasurer or the clerk, I guess the debate would be who knows the alphabet the best and who knows the numbering system the best, because they're clerical functions. And so I wonder how much efficiency, I know how much efficiency could be gained if we had Board of County Commissioners appointing to those people.
Next question over here.
Thank you, Bill, for being here to talk to us today. With regard to finances, can you tell us in fairly clear terms the relationship between Sedgwick County and the state of Kansas? Is it a one-way street? Do we get hunks of money from the state? If the state were to cut back a percentage to balance their budget, would the county be hurt, for example?
We are grateful for the state legislature. We're happy when they're not in session.
Love you too.
The grants to some of the programs that we have are essential in the operation. Grants to the health department, for mental illness, for mental health, for aging, for those with disabilities are critical. We have other sources of revenue that we used to get from the state: mortgage revenue, registration fees, which are now going to be diminished. Senator Donovan has a bill that's a bait and switch bill, that taking money from motor vehicles taxes that come to local governments and would be shifted over to school district, the state to help pay for the school districts. Donovan suggests that because of that because of that occurring and the lowering of those taxes, that I'm going to go buy a new car, and the sales tax is going to make up for that, which is the absurdity of voodoo economics. So we have a relationship with the state. Sedgwick County tries to not interfere and intervene with their work. We try to be supportive of them. We try to give them information so they can make informed decisions. We are dependent on their good graces in many cases for our success. And we are grateful for their help and grateful for their ideas and suggestions.
You talked about how the government is different in business, and you put fire stations in low cost of housing areas, the same as high cost of housing, and so on. I submit that maybe you're not close to the customer, you have some blind spots. What could be done about, let's say, road construction, where there's nobody working on the weekends, where there's traffic cones left in good weather and nobody working, and the traffic is disrupted? Is there a way to account for the lost time of the public in this, maybe in writing contracts or whatever?
That's a good question, and I know in larger urban settings where traffic counts on roads are enormous, and I'm familiar with one particular where the highway work is done from 10 o'clock till 6 o'clock, and 10 o'clock in the night till 6 in the morning, every day, and people just have to figure out how to go around that. So we know that when government when anybody specifies the work needs to be done in this time period, we are constraining businesses' ability to do their business, and we know the cost will go up when that occurs for that project. Now, is there offset cost by people traveling less time or less convenient? Could be. I don't have a good answer for you.
County Manager Bill Buchanan.
Thank you.